a code red for humanity. Curb emissions and dramatically reduce consumption or face a world that is fundamentally different.
When Kermit the Frog sang, "It's not easy being green," I want you to know that he was wrong. He was wrong.
There is no planet B. There is no planet blah. Blah, 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 blah.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change.
If unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Zero carbon.
East off.
Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista, Series 3, The Sky's the Limit. I'm Ian Collins and this is the UK's #1 environment-based podcast. This is the last episode of the current season and we're going out with a bang, a live audience, a massive field, some wisdom from the main man and a Q&A from the crowd. This is Dale Vince's Zero Carbonista, live from WOMAD. Welcome. So this is being recorded as a podcast, Dale. Podcast that we do every week called Zero Carbonista, which some of you, hopefully in the audience, are regular downloaders of said podcast. If you're not, you should be. It's fabulous. Dale is amazing. And we probably chomp through more subjects and issues that affect this strange, curious world of ours than we can manage really on a weekly basis. We're essentially doing the government's job, we'd like to think, for them to a degree. But let's just start, Dale. I mean, most people I would imagine in this audience are familiar with you. They're familiar with Ecotricity, but just give us a kind of an abridged Dale Vince story.
I'm an ex-hippie traveller, spent the 80s on the road, dropped in the 90s to try and build a big windmill, started the world's first green energy company in the mid-90s. Turned my attention from energy to transport and food in the early 2000s because those three things are 80% of everybody's personal carbon footprint: energy, transport and food. And it's the things we all spend money on every day that determine which way the world goes round, in effect, because businesses respond to what we spend money on. They make the kind of things that they think that we want to buy, and we can show them what we want to buy by buying the good things, not the bad things. And most recently, I'm kind of trying to get out of the energy business and get into the politics business in a way, because on my analysis, we've got everything that we need to get to net zero. We've got the technology that's matured now. We can make the cheapest energy on the planet from the wind and from the sun. It's the fastest to deploy and it's the cleanest. And we've also got economics on our side as well. It's seriously more economic for us to avoid the climate crisis than to let it happen and then try to deal with it. We've got people on our side increasingly as well. And the thing that we don't have are politicians and policies that will get us to net zero anywhere near fast enough. So I figure jumping into politics and trying to change that in some way is the next important frontier.
I mean, there's a couple of points there, isn't it? Again, we talk about on the podcast quite a lot that it's the no-brainer element of all of this, isn't it? You think, hang on, so there's renewable energy, it is there, it is available, it is clean, it is cheaper, and there's a lifelong supply of. So that would surely take nothing for the brilliant Liz Truss to, what an amazing woman, or Rishi Sunak, equally as boo. You'd think one of them would just go, okay, so I've been listening to this guy called Dale Vince. You've spoken to politicians, you've spoken to the Tories as well as Labour. You think one of them would just say, well, this is, there's nothing really to discuss here, is there, beyond this? What is there not to like? So, I mean, the resistance doesn't surely just come from massive oil companies. Is there a political naivety? Is it literally about not understanding anything you've just said? Well, what is that barrier that is stopping everything you've just talked about being achieved?
I think there are probably a number of factors at play. I mean, I do talk to a lot of people, a lot of politicians that actually don't have any idea about some of the facts around this. Some of it on your radio show. I've spoken to Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, people like that, and they say these things about renewable energy that just aren't true, and they don't have an idea about that. They say things like, but we can't be 100% from green electricity because we don't have enough room for all the windmills we need. We've crunched the numbers on that. And the answer to that is we need 1% of the land of Britain to be 100% powered by green electricity. So what are we waiting for? They say, but it needs massive subsidies, and the fact is it needs no public money at all. So again, what are we waiting for? Like you say, there's no actual downside. I think there's a knowledge deficit with people in government. I think there's prejudice as well. I think there's a kind of ideological lefty-righty split between renewable energy and nuclear power and fracking and all the big, dirty, expensive things that they have their faith in. And over here, the wind and the sun, the kind of things that people like us, have our faith in. But logic and economics and climate kind of imperative, they're all on our side of the argument. And there's no reason why we couldn't be 100% powered by green electricity within a decade if we simply change the planning system and let onshore wind come back. We don't need any money to do that. But I think there's another background that's changed as well in the meantime, which is the energy crisis that we've had for the last 2 winters now. And the war in Ukraine has made that, rather worse. The price of energy has gone through the roof. And there are people on the right side of life saying, well, we need to double down and frack. We need to drill more oil and that kind of stuff. And it doesn't make any sense to try and solve a problem caused by fossil fuels by drilling for more fossil fuels when we can build the infrastructure to power ourselves from the wind and the sun. And as you say, Ian, it'll last forever. We build it and it lasts forever. And it's the cheapest energy we can make. It's clean, it's fast, and it solves the climate crisis.
But what
into
about,
the bargain.
that the question that always comes back, which sounds like a naive question, but lots of people ask it, is there's not enough wind. That seems to be when you came on with me on the radio the other day, Dale did a debate with Richard Tice. Some might be familiar with him. He's a leader of Reform UK Party. And he was obviously very pro-fracking, and Dale was putting forward all the rather obvious arguments as to why that is a kind of no-brainer and a non-starter. But every other text that came through after you'd gone said, love Dale to bits, but we just don't have enough wind. Is that true or false? And then people say, I've just driven past some windmills. They weren't even turning. So there's proof that this is all bullshit.
That's one of the classic myths of renewable energy, right? That firstly, we don't have enough land to host it all. I've said before, the answer is we do easily. And the other is that it's not always windy or it's not always sunny and that kind of stuff. But my answer to that is to look to the national grid, the people that run the network of our country, whose job is to keep the lights on, and they say we can be powered 100% from the wind and the sun. They say that, and they run the network. So that's my answer to that. It's not simple. It does require technology, and smart meters are part of the shift that we need. We need just a smarter, more adaptive grid than the one we currently have. But that's underway. And in that 10-year period in which we build the infrastructure to make the energy, we can change the grid to be able to run on 100% renewable energy as well. They don't say 10 years, the national grid. I should say that. They think it might take 20. But if you go back to the late 90s, they were saying that we could take up to 20% renewable energy on the grid. That's where they were at.
Yeah.
So, they've moved their horizons. Now they say 100%. Now they say 20 years. It won't be long before they're saying 10 years.
The other big question, of course, that always comes through, let's assume, and we'll come back to fracking in a second, but the issue of the kind of global effort needed to make everything right, get down to net zero, constantly it comes up, doesn't it? What about China? What about India? What about the United States? Unless, our emissions in comparison are so low, these guys are in China, they're opening, coal-powered infrastructure on a daily basis. So where does that leave the planet?
For me, it's one of them eye-roll arguments. What about China? What about Britain, right? What moral standing do we have to speak to anybody on this issue if we haven't sorted ourselves out? So on the one hand, I say it doesn't matter what they do. We have to do what we know is right. But on the other hand, if you look at what they're doing, they're building renewable energy at a faster rate than we are, vastly faster than we are. And there are 1.4 billion people in that country. They've got a lot further to go than we have. But again, most of the world's solar panels are made in China, actually. So these guys are definitely part of the answer. They get the climate crisis. They're very serious about it. I think they've got a more effective form of government than we have, actually, when it comes to doing something. We tend to flip-flop between elections and different leaders of the Tory party and that kind of stuff, whereas China says, this is what we're going to do, and they get on and do it.
People always mention China and they mention India secondly, but actually the United States there's huge issues there and huge resistance to change there as well.
Yeah, you've got a right wing kind of, I don't know what you'd call them, cabal over there in the United States. I mean, it's kind of like potentially scary to think which way that country might go. They don't have Trump as leader anymore, but they've still got the Republicans dominating the Senate. And Biden, for all he's trying, is really struggling to get serious climate policies through. But there's a reality around the climate crisis that nobody can deny. Trump would, but nobody else probably will. It's unavoidable. The truths of the climate crisis, the record temperatures that we're having, the droughts, the wildfires. I mean, these have become global events. And, 10 years ago, they weren't happening in Europe. Right now, they are happening in Europe as well. And so we're all waking up to the fact that this is happening and we have to do something about it. For me, it's just a question of how bad things get before enough of us do enough to make a difference. It's only a matter of time.
Well, that's where fracking comes in, of course, because that is the answer to everything, as Richard Tice told you the other day on the radio. He said, Dale, you've got it all wrong. He said it's, in fact, he described it as treasure. He said there's treasure down there, to which you replied,
it's fool's gold.
Indeed. And there it was. But, I mean, we talked about this on the podcast a lot. I think the reason why a lot of right-wingers like fracking is because it sounds well-ard, doesn't it? It sounds like fracking. It sounds like something that drill, pound, excavate. It's got all of that. I really believe that. I actually think they're in love with the idea of it just sounds like you're going to do stuff. Yeah, get that oil out. Come on. Frack. It says everything. The onomatopoeic nature of the word is very seductive to a certain type of kind of, well, I'm tempted to say right-winger because I think that's probably what we're talking about here. And yet these guys think at the moment, obviously we'll come to the energy crisis in a second, but they are absolutely unequivocal in this point about fracking being the answer. Why is it not the answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's partly ideological, partly psychological, I think. But on the right side of life, people love high-tech, expensive, dangerous things like nuclear power, like fracking, that kind of stuff. And I think they're very suspicious of stuff like the wind and the sun, which is so natural and so safe and so easy. There's something wrong with them from their point of view. But here's another thing.
Why is it not the answer? I mean, it's obvious, really, but just for the purposes of this conversation.
Gotcha. Well, look, the answer's in the data, and it always is. And like chatting to Richard Tice, he was quoting figures from 2013 in terms of how much gas there may be under the ground if we destroy the rocks and extract it. And he's talking in terms of 50 years. But what he's missing is that last week, the people that published that report in 2013 published an update that said we have 5 years of gas under our feet if we frack. It'll take 5 years to get into full production, and it'll last just 5 years in total. So by the end of the decade, it's all gone. So I say, why bother? Why go to all that trouble, all that expense, all that risk to produce some gas that's going to last for a handful of years when we know we have to move to renewable energy anyway? We should just do it now. The sooner we do it, the better.
Well, then the next one that comes up is nuclear power, because, France don't seem to be experiencing quite the same energy crisis. Well, they are, but it's not anywhere near as bad as what we've got in terms of certainly domestic household bills. And the argument there is that that's because of their nuclear investment over the years that has been a game changer for France. Why don't we do the same?
And, it's true that France are mostly powered by nuclear energy. They have their own unique problems, actually, because they cool them from the river, from the rivers of France, not from the ocean. And so at times of heat waves and low water levels, they have to turn them off. And this has happened before and caused a different kind of energy crisis over here. But pushing that to one side, the problem with nuclear is speed. Richard Tice on the radio the other day, he said fracking's faster than nuclear.
So Richard Tice is getting way too many mentions on this podcast.
Yeah. But what he said was funny. He said fracking's faster than nuclear. And I wanted to say, oh my God, everything is faster than nuclear, right? That is not a claim that you can make. So it takes 10 years to plan a nuclear power station. It takes another 10 years to build it, and then another 10 years before it breaks even on a carbon basis. So, the French have built a whole bunch of nukes already. That's good for them. It puts them in a good position right now in this energy crisis. But if you say that nuclear is the answer to the climate crisis, the energy crisis, whatever you like, you've got to bear in mind that if you start today, it's 20 years before you're turning one on, if you're lucky, because they are beset by delays all of the time. It's just nature of the beast. 20 years before you can get any electricity from them. if you say, let's do the wind and the sun, 12 months, right? We can put up a windmill, put up a solar park in 12 months from day one if we started today. So much faster, cleaner, cheaper. And that's the other thing. Nuclear is super expensive. And then we don't even need to kind of get to this, but we shouldn't ignore it. The nuclear waste will last for longer than half of all recorded human history. It'll be toxic for that period of time. We don't know how to contain it. The best idea we've got is to lock it up in concrete so it'll last for 100 years and then somebody else can deal with the problem. But it's going to be toxic for thousands of years, and that seems to get overlooked. And instead, we are on the right side of life, hand-wring over the fact that we can see windmills like that's some like really awful thing. And the other thing to bear in mind with wind energy is if in 20 years' time we find a new form of energy that we like, you can take a windmill down in a handful of days and it's gone. You wouldn't know that it was there. You can see it as a temporary form of technology. It's not true with nuclear, right? If the Romans had nuclear power, Roman sites today like Bath that we might like to go and visit would be toxic, no-go areas. That's the legacy nuclear leaves.
And in terms of the political response to this, I mean, just to go, we know that the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, both shouting out net zero, net zero, net zero all the time. And then when you drill down to the kind of details of what they're saying, they're actually saying nothing at all. And I absolutely believe that if you sat both of those candidates down and said, just explain what you think net zero means, just explain how you think we'd get there, I honestly believe neither would actually have a clue what they're talking about. And I say that not to be smart or crass. I genuinely don't think they know. More disturbingly, perhaps, though, other than you'd have the Green Party, so if Caroline Lucas was sitting here, she'd be concurring with everything you just said, Dale. But I'm not so sure that the Labour Party are making enough noises about this at the moment. If ever there was an opportunity for Keir Starmer to really steal a march on something, surely it's now.
I agree. And hopefully they're just biding their time and they'll do it at the right time because it's our only hope, right? We've got a handful of years to make big changes to avoid the worst of temperature rises. We won't get it from a Tory government. The Greens can't get in power. Labour's our only hope. So, I hope that they will get it. I have spoken to some members, senior members of the party, and I know they get the whole green economy thing, renewable energy thing. So I'm hoping it's just a matter of timing. But it's a massive opportunity to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, to create real economic strength for our country, and fight the climate crisis as a sideshow. Here's a bunch of facts it's worth knowing. Before the crisis, the energy crisis, as a country, we spent £50 billion a year bringing fossil fuels to our country just to burn them. And if we spent that sum of money for just 2 years, we could build the infrastructure to make enough power to run the whole country forever, in effect, with just 2 years of that annual spend. Fossil fuels are being used as a single-use source of energy. That 50 billion at that point stays in our economy, right? That's £1 billion a week that doesn't leave our country and go up in smoke. It stays here. We create jobs here, hundreds of thousands of them, and create real economic strength. It's like the Brexit lie on the side of the bus, 350 million a week, except it's true and it's 3 times bigger. That's the opportunity of energy independence and renewable energy and the green economy. And fighting the climate crisis becomes like the icing on the cake for me. It's the kind of also-ran. We get that into the bargain.
You'd also think, and again, it's something we touched on the podcast before, in the States, there's a kind of branch of the Republican Party, curiously, who kind of get it, and the I don't know, the Republicans for the Environment, whatever they're called, which is it sounds like the greatest oxymoron ever, doesn't it? But there is a group that have worked out, if for no other reason, that there's money in their green hills, and there's lots of employment opportunities, lots of big business, lots of expansion. And they've looked at it on that level. And if that's the level somebody wants to look at it, then fine, because everything gets done that you're talking about. We haven't really got that over here either. We haven't really got a contingent of, Tories, they happen to be in power, that are saying, I'm sure there's some, but there doesn't seem to be a mobilised voice that is advancing the business case, if you like, for these kind of environmental changes.
I think there is, but we don't hear from them. The Conservative Environment Network are a group of people like those Republicans, and they do talk this kind of common sense approach, business approach, really, to renewable energy. I think The more people see renewable energy as the business opportunity, the better from my point of view, because then, it gets kind of backed by people with serious money and actually influence and that kind of stuff. It's got to move from, and it has to a big degree, move from being the preserve of hippies and enthusiasts and people that care to being mainstream business. Green energy is a mainstream business now globally, and it's got an awful lot of big companies and big money in it, and big pension funds and people like that are shifting the money out of fossil fuels and into renewable energy. One of the remaining problems we have is that government money still supports fossil fuels. So in our country, we spend far more supporting fossil fuels than we do renewable energy. And until that changes, the playing field is not level. And so even though people see the opportunity of green energy, it's still smaller than the opportunity of fossil fuels, just because of these artificial interventions in the market.
And you think now, bearing in mind we had this news this week that, we knew about the price cap changing on energy. We knew that meant that come October, already had this rise in April that, most people look at and think, is that really what an energy bill now looks like? And then there's another one coming in October, and then there's another one coming in January. I was telling you just before we came on, it wasn't that long ago that my standing orders I used to put 20 quid in a direct debit for gas and 20 quid for electricity. And that was only in 1998. It wasn't exactly, decades and decades ago. And that was the case for a while. And even up to a couple of years ago, it was only about twice that, wasn't it? So that people were put. Now we're in this territory where people are talking about next January, a monthly energy bill could be £500 plus. Now, does the genie ever go back in the bottle on that?
I think it's crazy. I mean, energy prices have pretty much tripled in 12 months. 12 months ago, the price cap was around about £1,000 a year. This October is going to be around about £3,000 a year. And there's no good reason for that, right? There's no shortage of fossil fuels in the world. It's fossil fuels setting the price, by the way, and it's global energy markets that are setting that price that we pay. So even though half of our gas came from the North Sea last winter, we paid a global price for it. We didn't save a penny because we have half of our gas from our own North Sea, which exposes the fallacy of people that say, well, we need to drill for more oil. That's the answer to this energy crisis. It clearly isn't. We need to break away from the global commodity markets that set the price of energy on the one hand, and break away from fossil fuels on the other hand, make our own energy here from renewables, because there is no global price for wind energy. It gets used where it gets made, and that's a wonderful thing. So if we make our own renewable energy here, we break away from the global commodity markets, and we don't have this problem. We shouldn't be paying £3,000 a year because the stuff isn't costing any more to get out of the ground. It's all about speculation and profit taking, and we can see that in BP's results announced this week, £10 billion made in just 3 months this year, which is just incredible. All of that money is coming from all of us through inflated energy bills. And, it's fundamentally wrong that happens.
So nothing has happened. There's not a shortage. There is merely a broken system in dealing with the energy that is available. Is that more or less the case? The system is broken, not the shortage of the stuff itself.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's this free market dogma that says, we have to let energy markets, commodity markets decide what the price of things should be, and then everything kind of sorts itself out. It's clearly a broken model. We can see that increasingly. Globalization is a broken model. We can see that as well. There's no shortage of fossil fuels. It isn't costing more to get out the ground, but we can pay 4, 5, 6 times as much for it this year as we did last year, just because the markets say it's suddenly worth more money because there's fear in the market, fear of shortage, not actual shortage.
And what actually happens then come, the winter time? We do lots of phone-ins on my radio shows on this area about, how affordable this is. And everybody knows about robbing Peter to pay Paul and cutting back on things and being sensible, cancelling, gym membership or swimming lessons for the kid, whatever you do. But there is a point that if somebody is asking you for another 100 quid a week for hundreds of thousands of people, that is simply not, there is no more robbing Peter. There literally is no more money.
Yeah, and I think there is more money. It's a choice being made by government at the moment not to support people through this energy crisis. So we spent nearly £400 billion getting through the pandemic to keep the economy whole, to preserve jobs and preserve people. We could spend 1/10 of that this winter to get people through. the energy bill crisis. Millions of people will have unaffordable energy bills this winter. It would cost 1/10 of the pandemic money. And that was a 1 in 100 year event for sure. But I think this energy crisis is as well. And it doesn't make sense to me just to say to everybody, well, as far as energy bills are concerned, you're on your own. And by the way, the government still has VAT on energy bills. You know, they've seen the VAT take treble in 12 months, from £50 a year to £150 a year. And so while they say that they care about the high price of energy, they're taking an increasing amount of tax from it on the QT. And it's just fundamentally wrong. I mean, why do we even tax energy? We don't tax food. It's one of the essentials of life. But there are all kinds of problems, I think, in our country, in the world, and with what politicians say. The difference between what they say and what they do, that's the fundamental problem.
Which brings us back to kind of what we alluded to at the very beginning, and that is your future, but moving from starting the world's first green energy company and moving into politics. So you have Ecotricity sitting there, incredibly successful. Even the name of the company is kind of an ongoing selling point to keep the debate alive, if you want to look at it that way as well. But you're legging it. What's going on, Dale Vince?
Yeah, there's like a mixture of things. I said at the time, we've got a pipeline of projects that need to be built of 2,000 megawatts. It needs an investment of about £3 billion. Our way of doing things is organically to make money to then invest in generation. It will take us some decades to build this pipeline. But if we could find a new owner with the money, they could build it much faster. And that's the kind of speed with which we need to move at the next 5 years or so. So that's one thing. I think Ecotricity could therefore have more impact without me. I feel that I've done as much as I can do in energy, actually, within Ecotricity. So from that point of view, I'd like to find a kind of a more important frontier. You know, green energy is not a frontier anymore. It's a well-proven option that we have. And as I said earlier, I think the missing piece of our puzzle, we've got the technology, the economics, the people. The missing piece is the politics. And so I wanted to be free to get involved in the next election and try and advocate for proper net zero policies, to try and encourage political parties to adopt proper net zero policies, because this is the most important election of our lifetimes, in my view. If we don't get a government that takes a grip of this issue at the next election, then we will exceed probably 3 degrees of global temperature rise, in my view, which we see what that looks like. It was just 2 weeks ago we had that incredible heat wave here. That's not a nice vision of the future. So it's about a mixture of things. Ecotricity can do more without me. I can do more in a different frontier. And this next election is the most important thing. You know, we've got everything we need, everything except some politicians and some policies that can get us to net zero.
So does that mean you're going to become the Lord Dale Vince, or Dale Vince MP, the Right Honourable Dale Vince?
Yeah. Thank you. I looked long and hard at the idea of trying to become an MP for Stroud. Stroud's an important key marginal. It needs to be won back from the Tories, in my view. But I decided not to do it. Thank you. I decided not to do it. I don't think it'd be best suited to my nature to be an MP and to be in Parliament every day. And I don't think it would be the best use of my time, or the way that I can have the most influence. So what I'm doing instead is starting a think tank called the Green Britain Foundation. What I'm going to do is produce policy there in the way that we have been at Ecotricity over the years. We come up with ideas like green gas, for example, and we publish reports, and we get on and build things and show how things work. What I want to do is create a think tank where we develop policy that shows how we get to net zero, and we present that policy to political parties, to governments, and encourage them to adopt it. I want to make it easy for them to say, these are the things you need to do to achieve this, that, and the other. And I think it's the place where I can have most impact.
So let's have some questions for Dale. I think we've got some microphones out there as well, haven't we? Are we down here first, then we'll go over here? Over here?
Can you give an update on green gas, please?
Yeah, so our first project is being built now in Reading. It'll harness 3,000 acres of surrounding land and make enough gas to power 4,000 homes every year. The gas is pretty much carbon neutral, according to Imperial College, who did a study for us. It's 90% lower carbon than fossil fuels, and they say with a few more tweaks to the process, we can get to about 99. So we'll be looking at that. And green gas is like this amazing opportunity we have. So we have an issue in that most of our homes are heated by fossil gas, and about 15% of our carbon footprint comes from that. And it's a challenge known as the decarbonisation of heat challenge, which is long, dry language for the simple fact that we have to stop using fossil gas. Governments say we can do this via heat pumps. It's a colossal mistake to say that or to try and do that, which they're not trying to do, so that's not so bad. They're just saying it. But we have enough grassland in our country to make all of the gas that we need. We can be energy independent in gas and in electricity, and that's part of the joined-up vision that we're trying to push.
Okay, next question, just at the front.
I'm going to put you in charge of the world for one day. Which 3 new laws would you introduce?
I would ban exploration for any more forms of fossil fuel, job number 1. I would remove all subsidies and support for fossil fuels, job number 2. And I would do the same for animal farming. Take away all forms of support, introduce proper animal rights law, that protects animals from the awful abuse of factory farming. I mean, actually, I'd just ban factory farming, right? If I'm the boss of the world, I'd just ban factory farming.
There it is. Another question, I think, over there, and one over there.
Thanks. I'm a massive admirer. Is the system really broken, though? Because if the system's designed to create profits for the biggest companies who are in power at the moment, then you could argue it's not. I think the reason I asked the question, is the system really broken, which is clearly rhetorical, is in order to change things politically, which I think is the right thing, do you not need also to address the fact that so many people are wedded to it? I'm living in Stoke-on-Trent. The entire city has been devastated and also starved, and now they're saying we'll give you a little bit of food back if you vote for us. And all these votes that people perceive in the wrong policies, and the fact that there is actually a lot of jobs involved in crap, because friction, it seems to me, making things difficult, creates jobs for people in vans, for people online, for people on telephones and so on, and doing things rationally doesn't. And I'm not saying this destroys any of what you said. I agree with almost everything you said, but I'm saying that I think we need people on the streets to make sure that these policies get implemented. And do you agree with that idea? And what is your comment on that idea to give you more freedom? Sorry.
Thank you. So what I would say is what is broken, I think, is our democracy. So our system of electing a government is broken. This first past the post, it gives us a minority government almost every time. The Tories had a minority of the vote. They've got an 80-seat majority. They can do whatever they want. We need proportional representation so that all voices get heard.
Good call. In the middle, I think there's a young lady over there in the middle, in the green or blue.
This is quite a big question, just interested in your opinion on it. But as you mentioned that renewables are a big business, how do we transition to a just green society that doesn't mirror the injustices caused by current big oil and gas companies in regards to workers' rights and, for example, like the mining of lithium for electric car batteries?
I think we have to change our entire economy. Right, we're kind of almost persuaded by a media and political narrative that this is the way it has to be, the way things work in our country and in the world. This kind of dog-eat-dog kind of capitalism that keeps millions of people struggling. They're in work but struggling to feed themselves and their families because they have low pay. And at the other end of the scale, you've got relative handfuls of people making enormous sums of money. It doesn't matter what the industry is, that's what's happening. That's a system that's man-made, right? These aren't the laws of physics that can't be changed. We can change the economic system that we have in our country so that we treat people more fairly, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of food banks, but they shouldn't exist in the world. They shouldn't exist in our country. It shouldn't be necessary for people to go to a food bank to feed themselves. Unions as well. We shouldn't need unions. We should have proper employment law. That means we just don't need unions because people are treated decently. We tax companies at a far lower rate than we tax people. So on average, we might all pay 30% income tax. If you're a company, you pay 19% profit tax. And there's a big difference in that, not just between 19 and 30, but income and profit. So companies get to offset all of the money they spend on their overheads, including their staff, and then they only pay the 19% on what's left. And I don't understand that. Why do we tax companies less than we tax people? Millions of whom are struggling, millions of whom need benefits and that kind of stuff. and that's not a nice way to live. And at the same time, we tax money made with money at a far lower rate than we tax money made with a pair of hands. These things are fundamentally wrong in our economy, and that's what we need to change.
Good work. Another question for Dale.
Hello, I'm a teacher teaching 10-year-olds about sustainability, but that's a long-term project. So what should educationalists be doing right now to help?
My first thought was that that's not actually a long-term project. You've got a couple of years to teach those kids in primary school. Yeah, on the crossover, isn't it? We launched something new called the Ministry of Eco Education about 12 months ago, and we built a primary school curriculum that's got sustainability written, woven into every single topic in the school. And thank you. And we launched it last September. We're piloting with something like 15 schools from Southampton to Liverpool, I think is the span at the moment. It's something that teachers are really keen for, kids are really keen for, and parents as well. And we're just writing a secondary school version as well, which we'll launch this September. And I just think giving kids an understanding of sustainability is the most important thing, right? They're going to come into this world that we've created deficient otherwise in some of the knowledge that they're going to need to make the right decisions. So that's what we're doing. So what I would say to you is, like, look up the Ministry of Eco Education and see if you can get your school to adopt it, our curriculum.
Is that compulsory? Is that your own option to include that in your lessons, or is that part of the syllabus? It's part of the syllabus. So that's your own option to do that. You would think by now, it's just why I asked, you think by now that would be at least missing in there somewhere, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's just missing. I understand that, which is why we moved last year to create one. Because it actually came about through a head teacher that I know in Stroud said to me, like, we produce great kids here, really, really decent kids when they leave this school, primary school, but we don't teach them anything about the environment, and that really worries me. And I said, well, look, let's get together. You're the teacher, we're the eco people, let's build a curriculum that actually does the job, and that's what we did.
Another question.
The biggest polluters in the world are the super rich, with their private yachts and their private jets and their SUVs. What can we do about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question and a very good point. I think half the carbon in the world is coming from maybe the top 10% of people in terms of income. And that's why a simple approach to carbon taxing doesn't work. It's regressive because, people at the lower end, bottom end of the income scale have a normal carbon footprint. It's the people that have an outsized carbon footprint that should be paying for that. And so we can do that in all kinds of different ways. So at the moment, for example, if you look at your energy bill, there are various taxes applied to it by the government, and they're done in a uniformed way. So it's regressive. So the people that can afford energy the least are paying this tax the same as anybody else. So we could create an allowance in energy bills of, say, 3,000 units a year. That's an annual average consumption. And so if you use that or less, you pay no tax. And then as you use more, you pay increasingly more tax. And we could add a carbon tax to that as well, so that really high users, people that have an awful lot of money, actually can pay for that pollution that they're causing. They can pay, they should pay. We can do it in energy bills. We can do it in all kinds of things. We could do it in a frequent flyer tax as well, because again, the stats are scary. A handful of people, a few percent of people in our country are taking nearly 50% of all flights. Cheap flights aren't about enabling people to have cheap holidays. It's about enabling some people just to fly around the world willy-nilly, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. So it's just about taxing consumption. That's what we have to do, outsized consumption, not normal consumption. We should leave that free, like you have an allowance in income tax. The first few £1,000s is tax-free. It should be the same in everything.
Just on the back of that question, we just get a show of hands from anyone who owns a private jet. 33. That's quite a lot, isn't it, in one? Get out! Next question. We've got some at the front here. There's a microphone just coming your way, sir.
I was just thinking, what do we actually do about this? What would a pay strike not work, as in, everybody saying, I'm not paying Shell this month, or forever? I don't know. I guess they obviously are tied into a contract, but, if people strike from work, why can't we strike from the energy companies that are making all this money?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Please don't strike from ecotricity is all I want to say. But
Just all the others. That's all right.
just the other guys. Yeah, I mean, I understand the question as well. What can we do? Because it's like frustrating, right? We can see that so much is wrong and the answers are so simple. What can we do? We'll get a chance at the next election to do something. But, we probably took that chance at the last election and it didn't work out so well. I share your frustration. I don't actually know the answer. I'm just going to keep on,
There is talk, isn't there, of a general strike?
Yeah, there is. There is, yeah.
Obviously, it's slightly different reasoning and thinking, but could there be a contagion within the general strike that we all strike?
That would be good.
I think we should all strike for a year. I think it'd be fantastic.
Well, I'm up for it. We need to maybe take to the streets. Maybe that's the answer.
Question right at the front, and then we've got one in the middle there.
We've seen some horrific things being done by the water companies that are making horrific amounts of money and doing very little with it to protect our rivers and streams. I just wonder what your thoughts are on the public ownership of utilities in the future, including water, gas, electricity.
It's worth just saying, Dale, by the way, has anyone else noticed that we've had our eye on our energy bills? Anyone else notice what's been happening to water bills that are also just going upwards at a ridiculous rate? And it's not really being talked about an awful lot. We had that very discussion on the radio the other day about, when you start to break it down and think, hang on, this is energy. We're not talking about buying biscuits or, opting for some item of clothing or something. This is how we feed ourselves and heat ourselves. And yet it's in private hands.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that about water bills. But I think the fundamental problem is the privatization of water and energy and rail, actually, some decades ago now. That's a clearly failed dogma in that it was meant to bring greater efficiency and so on and so on. All it's done is bring great profits for the owners, who increasingly are foreign pension funds. That's particularly true in the water industry. I think taking it back into public ownership, water companies and energy companies, would be really expensive. And I think there's a better way to get what we want, because what we want are utility industries that serve us, that invest for the long term, that solve problems rather than creating problems, and they put the money back into the service that they provide. That's how it used to be under public ownership. But we can achieve that through proper regulation, because they all hold a license to operate, and we can make them do what we want them to do if we have a regulator that is so minded, rather than allowing them to make big profits every year. So I think the answer is not privatization, it's proper regulation, and we can get what we want that way.
There was a guy just in the middle there with the question.
Thanks. Hi, Dale. Do you think there's more to be done about the way shareholders are making money out of the status quo? They therefore have a vested interest through getting their dividends as a share of the profits that are being made. What's to be done?
Yeah, I think one of the fundamental problems we have is in company law, and that companies are set up to benefit shareholders. That's the single purpose in life, actually. And I think we need to rewrite the purpose of companies so that we can rewrite the outcome, in effect, and force them to focus on social outcome and environment outcome as well. Companies at the moment are virtually mandated to pursue profit above everything else. And when you do that, you make bad decisions for the people around you and the environment. And, business can be a good model. It can be a very efficient way of getting things done and be very focused. But what we need are businesses that don't just pursue money. A business like Ecotricity, for example, that has a mission and puts its money back into the mission to create some good. All businesses could be that way, and shareholders could still benefit. But at the moment, it's shareholders above everything else, and I think that's wrong.
Question, lady with a hand up, just kind of halfway down.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Just to say on that previous question, you just need to change 2 letters from shareholders to stakeholders, and you've cracked it. But my question is, Dale, I have no worries about the big ideas. They're going to keep coming, and we all encourage you with your new initiative. The issue is influencing, and actually, there are folks like us who care a lot about this, and then there are people on the other end of the continuum who are complete skeptics. You're never going to influence them. And there's a whole bunch of people in the middle, ordinary folk, and they actually don't care very much. And I'm really interested about strategies for influencing.
It's a good question. And our answer to this is something we call green populism. it's about talking to people in a different way. Not talking about the climate crisis as if it's an issue around, polar bears and melting ice caps, and doing something altruistic for generations to come and that kind of stuff. Because a lot of people are only bothered about what's happening in their lives this week and next week. We've got to talk to people in terms that matter to them. And so I mentioned before this idea that we spend £50 billion a year burning fossil fuels. And for me, it's a great example of how we can present what we need to do, but in a very different way. We can say to people, this is a terrible waste of money. If we spend that money on renewable energy here, we can have our own energy made here forever, and it can be super cheap. We can create loads of jobs, loads of economic benefit. All of this is good for people. And the climate crisis is just something that follows in the wake of all of that, because we get to net zero that way. So it really is about how we communicate. We've been doing work with the Daily Express for well over a year now. I think we're approaching 2 years. We took our message really to a very different audience that way, and the same that we did with Forest Green into the world of football fans. And I believe that we've got to get outside of our bubbles, and we've got to talk to those people that you mentioned, the people in the middle that kind of maybe they're on the fence, maybe they're too busy to care. They need to be persuaded that actually the stuff that we need to do is in all of our interest, but our immediate interest, not some kind of altruistic crusade, which is often what this looks like to people, but our immediate benefit right now.
Doesn't that also take, good politicians to, a lot of people say, well, it's misinformation, net zero, the group that was just referred to there that really couldn't give a toss about any of this. It's all a load of green nonsense, all of this stuff. And in fact, I don't think it is misinformation. It's just a lack of information, isn't it, that's coming from the government. You can see the confusion of the group in the middle who might not care because they haven't got that information. Somebody contacted us the other day and said, I'm confused about why cars have been pretty destructive in this entire picture and what they belch out, and yet they're still perfectly legit, perfectly legal. You can buy as many of them as you like. You can drive them as often as you like. And yet, supposedly, they are the totemic public enemy number one. So, I think that group in the middle are royally confused on that. You think, well, which one is it? Because on one minute we've got net zero, got to get to net zero. Even Liz and Rishi are telling us about net zero, even if they don't have a clue what it's about. But nonetheless, they're saying it. And yet, on the other hand, go buy some big gas-guzzling cars.
That's true. I think, there's a real danger for us that it becomes just another branch of the culture war. The people that want net zero and the people that want fossil fuels and stuff like that. We can't allow that to happen, because the truth is the move to net zero is good for everybody, absolutely everybody. And it's our job just to communicate that and find different ways. We've got to talk to different people in different ways. I mean, that's the reality, I think, of communication. So that's what we do.
There's a guy right in the middle, his hand up there. Thank you.
Dale, you mentioned PR before, and I just wanted to sort of redress some of the political balance, because I'm a Liberal Democrat and I'm the one party that you haven't mentioned yet. We've been advocates for PR for decades. We're also quite strong in this part of the world. We run Somerset Council, we run Oxfordshire councils, and we're the official opposition in Wiltshire. So if you want to get rid of the Tories, you have to vote Lib Dem in this part of the world, I'm afraid. And we also have very sound green credentials. I also happen to be the Wiltshire councillor for this area that we're all sat in this morning. And I have sort of daily sort of work to do with planning applications coming in for solar panel farms and battery energy storage solutions. And I've been dismayed at the fact that there appears to be no national strategy for where these things should go. They do generate lots of local opposition. I mean, in theory, I'm really supportive of these sorts of schemes, but obviously, one also has to work with the local residents as well. But the government has no strategy at all as to where these things should be located. They just seem to rely on market forces to drive all this stuff. And I'm just wondering, what can we do to try and extract some sensible policy or strategy from the government, or are we just, up against it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think what you said there, the government have no strategy for batteries and solar farms. I mean, you could just take the first half of that sentence, the government has no strategy, right? And I think it's absolutely true. And then you said they just leave it to market forces. Again, absolutely true. That's what they do. So we do lack a proper energy strategy. There's no doubt about that. We lack a proper food strategy as well. There's no doubt about that. What can we do? My big hope is that come the next election, we see tactical voting. We see a big rise in the number of Lib Dem MPs and Labour MPs, and that between them, they form a government and bring in PR. That's my big hope. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but we saw tactical voting in recent by-elections, and I think, we're going to see it again, I hope, in the next election.
We're getting some questions from our live feed. Dale, can you tell us a bit more about Horse Common, please?
I don't know the latest on Horse Common, but it's a piece of land in the New Forest that we've fundraised with the Daily Express to buy for the RSPB. And last I heard, I think we were halfway to our target of about £70,000. Is that right, Helen? Yeah, we're about halfway there. Chris Packham's been helping us. He's visited and made some videos and stuff like that. And it's just a kind of lovely piece of land. I've been down there. That's kind of like a missing piece that would join up a couple of different RSPB plots of land for rewilding, basically, and creating some really different habitats. And so, yeah, we're halfway to the target.
Cool. There's a guy just over there with the cap.
Hello. Thanks, Dale, for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate it. I think the fact of the matter is that there's a criminal cabal in charge that are just siphoning cash out of our economy and the world's economy for their own uses as long as they can possibly can. And we all know what's happening. And dismantling, disrupting the political system is the only chance that we've got as people to do that. And I hope that tactical voting is the only way we can do it next time. But more importantly, what I wanted to ask is, are you confident that you've got the right team to succeed this year?
Ian asked me that, or somebody asked me that before we came on stage here. And I said, I'm not confident, actually, but I'm not unconfident either. I think it's a new league. We've got a new team, and the only way we're going to know is by trying, right? And so today's our first game, and that'll give us our first taste of what it's going to be like. So I'm in that middle place. I'm neither confident nor unconfident, but I'm excited. I mean, I love football, and the beginning of a new season in League One, it doesn't get a lot better than that.
I think we're time for another question right at the very front.
Hi there. So I've been looking at the books down at the front, and I've counted them up, and I'm aware that would pay my rent and probably quite a more after that. And I struggle a lot to make that payment every month. How are you going to convince people that you're different when we can see, if we look at possible profit that you might make from, say, your books, that could make such a major impact for some people's individual lives? How will you convince people that you are different from other big names in the energy world?
Well, that's cool. Well, firstly, I'm not going to try to do that. I think people can just judge me for what I do. I'm happy for that. Secondly, all of the proceeds of the book are for charity. They're not for me. And thirdly, as I sit here, what I'm minded to do anyway, I was going to say at the end, is to give them away, because I'm never comfortable selling them anyway. And I would like to offer you all, if we have enough, a book if you want one. So they're my three answers.
They started off at £5 each about an hour ago. That's the greatest reduction ever. They are all free. Fantastic. And I think that just about hits the clock for us. But ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big thank you to Mr. Dale Vince.
Thank you, everybody.
And that's it for this episode and this series. We are back at the beginning of September, right after the Earth has burnt up a little more. Don't forget, of course, you can follow this podcast from your podcast provider so that you get each episode automatically, and leave a review there too. Do make sure you follow Dale on social media, twitter.com/Dale Vince, facebook.com/Dale Vince. Have a cracking summer. We're back in September.
Zero carbon east of.